Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So, um, I'm going to talk about modern monetary theory. This is currently hugely controversial. Lots of people are jumping up to denounce it, are saying this is completely wrong and it will cause disaster and so on. Because modern monetary theory says that those people at the helm of power, like Larry Summers and Ben Bernanke, they made tremendous mistakes, and they actually caused the global financial crisis. So it is very hard for them to admit anything about how it could be right. So it's a very radical and revolutionary theory. When I started, actually, I've taught a whole course on this recently, last semester, and I'm finished the text and most of the lectures this semester also. These lectures are all publicly available. When I started, my intention was only to understand what it is, and I was really skeptical. I didn't really think that it was correct. There were many claims in it that seemed wrong or even ridiculous and absurd, because they contradict so strongly what we have been taught to believe. So, but after a semester, I have become a convert. So now I really believe that MMT is the right way to go. I'm not saying that this is the truth, but this is the direction in which we can look for the truth. So, as we all know, macroeconomics is massively important. Today, the newspapers are full of macroeconomics. Everybody, from your public man on the street, the pahnwala, is also talking about macroeconomics. Deficit ka kya hoga, trade ka kya hoga, taxes ka kya hoga, everything. This is all macro. So inflation, deficit, trade gap, exchange rate, interest rates, all of these are topic of common conversation. But all of these terms are quite deeply technical terms. Even an ordinary textbook in economics will not be able to explain this correctly. You have to have deeper understanding than a conventional macro textbook will give you. To understand these concepts, you need a macroeconomic theory in which these terms are used. The public has wrong ideas, extremely wrong ideas about all of these things. For example, a very simple common perception is that the strong rupee means a strong economy, which is exactly the opposite of the truth. So so the theories are wrong, the macroeconomic theories that you are being taught are wrong, the ideas that the public has are based on the ideas floated by the economic experts, and these are wrong. And then there are people who are writing in the newspapers as if they are experts, and they know nothing about economics, and they do nothing. And so that really makes the whole business very complicated. More than that, more than just widespread confusion, there is an interest in certain groups to deceive the public, to make the public believe that IMF's programs are good for us. The Confessions of the Economic Hitman is just a simple explanation of this problem, but this is true at a much deeper level. The financial lobby would like you to believe certain theories about how the financial system works, which are very beneficial for them and very harmful for the general public. Atif Mia and Amir Sufi's book, The House of Debt, explains very strongly how a wrong macro theory was firmly planted in the minds of the public and the Congress. As a result, when the global financial occurred, the bailout was given to the financial institutions in trillions of dollars, and nothing was given to the defaulting mortgagers. And he says that the whole crisis could have been prevented if instead of giving bailout to financial institutions, we had bailed out the mortgages. The financial institutions had actually caused the fraud and deception which created the global financial crisis. So, in a sense, like if somebody stabs you in the back, then you apply the medicine to the knife instead of the back. This is what was done because the wrong theories were spread. So, when the global financial crisis occurred, all major macro theories were proven wrong. That there are textbooks, some of you have seen it, 7 schools of macroeconomic thought. All 7 schools were wrong. There's not that one of them was right and others were wrong. All of them proved to be unable to predict the global financial crisis. The Queen of England went to London School of Economics to ask why did no one see it coming, and they had no answers. The US Congress created a committee to investigate, to create a science of economics. Solo, who testified before the committee, said that these theories of Lucas and Sargent are crazy. They're not fit for this planet, they're fit for Mars. Krugman said that the profession as a whole went astray. Olivier Blanchard, who was the chief economist of IMF, he said that the assumptions of the DSG model are profoundly at odds with what we know about the real world. Paul Romer has written Trouble with Macro, in which he has said how macroeconomics has gone backwards for the past few decades, and that the macroeconomics propose theories which are just diametrically opposed to the facts, and they refuse to look at the facts and correct their theories. So, for example, the idea that money is neutral is easily disproven by just looking at the data. If you have you pump money and it causes reduction in employment as per Keynesian ideas, you constrict money and it causes depression, and then to say that money only affects prices and doesn't affect the real economy is just nonsense. But economists, major leading macroeconomists, are on the record as saying that money is a whale and money is neutral. In fact, the real business cycle model is based on the idea that you can take money out of the economy, and in fact you should take money out of the economy in order to understand. So this is so completely and deeply flawed model of macroeconomics. After the global financial economics, the Church of Chicago had many apostates. Many people renounced their faith, and many leading economists, but not all of them. So after the global depression of 29, Keynes created a new macroeconomics. In fact, the word macroeconomics, the theory macroeconomics, was created by Keynes. There was no macroeconomics before Keynes because people believed that if you understand macro and you just aggregate, you understand micro, you understand behavior of individual firms and individuals, you just add them up all up and you get macro. This exact issue was disputed by Keynes, and this is called complexity theory. It's called the fallacy of aggregation, that the whole is different from the sum of its parts, and this is the central starting point of macro. If you don't understand this, you can't understand macro. Unfortunately, modern macro denies this. So in modern macro, you have little firms where the price is a constant for them, the output, the impact of their output does not have an impact on the price, which is perfectly fine if you have a small firm. But if you take the industry as a whole and every firm increases its production by 1 unit, then there is a major change in the output of the industry, and this is definitely going to impact the price. So to think that the industry supply is the same as the sum of the firm supplies, which is what is taught in every textbook, is wrong, and it can easily be proven to be wrong. So the supply curve is not the sum of the individual supply curves, and similarly the demand curve is similarly problematic. So the basics that you are taught in macro are just flat, simple, wrong. So Keynesian macro was invented, uh, but it was neutralized. Keynesian economics was a very, very dangerous theory. If we had followed it up, we could have learned something about the real world. But the Samuelson-Hicks synthesis actually lost all of the revolutionary aspects of Keynes. They created what is called the neoclassical synthesis. So they said that Keynes, you can have the short run, we will take back the long run. So they said that basically what Keynes was saying was that wages are rigid in the short run. So the supply and demand equilibrium doesn't work. In the long run, wages adjust and you get back to neoclassical equilibrium. So basically, you could have Keynesian phenomena in short run, and long run was back to the neoclassical theories, which the classical theories before Keynes, which became neoclassical after Keynes. So Keynes said that I am not a Keynesian, because Keynes, this was not what he was saying. And Keynes did not argue for rigidity of wages. He said that even if the wages are flexible, you will have the same problems. And he said that money is not neutral either in the short run or in the long run. So these are the, and he said that there is radical uncertainty. So these are the three key ideas of Keynes: that money is not neutral in short run and long run, supply and demand equilibrium in labor market never happens, and wages can be flexible, it doesn't matter, there is complexity, and future is radically uncertain, so you can't have rational expectations about it. But Keynes partially prevailed post global depression. In 1930s, there was a lot of legislation which created regulations on the financial sector, and a lot of theories were created in the 1960s and 70s. I was brought up, when I was in graduate school, we studied the Keynesian model. The ISLM model is a Keynesian model, although not true Keynesian, it's pseudo-Keynesian, we might call it. So there was an impact, even though Keynes himself, genuine Keynesian economics was never actually understood by economists, but pseudo-Keynesian economics was understood and applied, and even that, there was only one basic lesson of Keynes, that the free market doesn't create full employment, so the government has to do it. Just this one idea was used, and it was used successfully. The government did successfully create full employment for about 2 decades following the World War II. But then after the oil shock in early 70s, we saw stagflation, which was inflation combined with unemployment, and that led to rejection of Keynes and the rise of the Chicago School, which is, Chicago School is very strongly aligned with the interests of the rich and the powerful. See, we are, when we are taught laissez-faire, let everybody do whatever they want, we are told that this is a neutral theory, it's equal for all. I can do whatever you want and you can do whatever you want. But actually, in reality, this theory is heavily beneficial for the powerful, because the poor, they don't have much choice. The only thing they are free to do is to sell themselves for money, whereas the capitalists, they have huge amounts of freedom to do a lot of things. So this idea of let everybody be free is actually a very strongly pro-rich and powerful theory. And this lobby has taken over in the US government, all over the world. And so today, the oppression of labor in the US is just the same as oppression of poor countries by the rich countries. So basically, nations have broken down. Previously, there was an idea that the rich and powerful of a country would take their population along, but this has now broken down. Now it's a coalition of multi-billionaires, which is global, international. They are in China, they are in Russia, and they are in UK, and they all have same interest, and the bottom 90% in all across the world have the same interest. But here the point is that just like global depression caused a change in theories, so modern monetary theory is the only theory which can actually explain the global financial crisis today. There is no other macro theory currently available which can explain what happened in the global financial crisis. But strangely enough, unlike GD29, well, I guess it's similar. Genuine Keynesian theory were never allowed to emerge. Similarly, today, modern monetary theory is a very minority and unfavored theory. Nobody teaches it, and all of the leading orthodox economists are talking against it, that it is all wrong and it will cause great damage. So it is a puzzle that actually what I'm saying is that MMT is the true theory, or at least it is much closer, much more accurate, it has much more explanatory power than existing macro theories. But all over the world, if you go to any graduate school, you won't find MMT being taught. Actually, after the global financial crisis, one would have expected that people would try to come up with a theory which can explain this, but it has not happened. Why? Well, basically it's power knowledge. If we miseducate the public, they support policies which favor the rich and wealthy and go against their own interests. And this is. So what are the key MMT messages? MMT, by the way, is an outgrowth of Keynes. It's actually quite a bit more advanced and sophisticated than original Keynes. And it is the theory for today. So some of the key messages are that market forces cannot deliver full employment. This is exactly the same as Keynes' message. Unemployment leads to massive human misery, breakup of marriages, wreckage of families. Today in the USA, also in Pakistan, husband and wife both must work to support themselves, and so the children, there's nobody to look after, and this causes really harm. And if husbands cannot find work, this causes real psychological damage to the family. So this is the biggest problem facing any economy, is to find jobs for all the people. This is very different from what standard economic theory tells you, which is that you should maximize growth. We don't care about growth. It's not very helpful. What we want to do is to make sure that everybody has a job. This will so that they can feed their families. Now, this requires very different ways of thinking. If you want to achieve this, achieve this, standard macro cannot do it. I have an article in Dawn last week which describes some of this. I'm not sure I'll be able to get to that point. So, markets cannot create full employment, even if you support them to the maximum. So even applying Keynesian fiscal and monetary policy will not actually do the job. Keynesian fiscal policy will actually, if you do it correctly, I mean, if you let it be out of the private sector, do what is so-called crowding out. So government interventions are necessary to allow the markets to function. This is exactly the opposite of the Chicago school lesson, that the less the government intervenes, the better off the market is. And one key message which is dramatically opposite of conventional understanding is that the government deficit is exactly equal to the private sector surplus. This is something that I'll just say right now, and I'll try to explain it later on. So the point is that these are all these are all contrary to widely believed myths of the free market. So I'm going to go through 10 myths. This is taken from an article. One of the biggest myths is that the government budget constraint is like the household budget constraint. This has been written by many economists, and many senior policy makers have written this in their newspaper articles as well as their mindset. Now this is simply not true. The government budget constraint is not like the household budget constraint, because the government can create money. So everybody knows from monetary theory that the money supply in January 2001 is not the same as money supply in April 2000 in May 2019. So there is a lot more money. Where did this come from? Where did we pay for this money? No, it was printed. This money was printed. It came out of into existence from nothing without any cost. So this idea that somehow it was not raised by taxes. So the idea that you have to earn money in order to spend it is true for every household, it is true for every firm, but it is not true for the government. This is exactly another illustration of the phenomena of complexity. What is true for every single individual is not true for the collectivity of all the individuals. There is a post I have, which is, and this is based on one of the lectures in macro, that describes how the Bank of England came into existence. This provides a lot of nitty-gritty detail about what happens, how money creation takes place, and how it is always from nothing. So I've given you a reference here, and if you read, you will get better understanding about the sovereign money, the idea that money can be created out of nothing. There is no need to balance the budget, and in fact, if you try to balance the budget, you will cause great harm to the economy. The one way to understand it very simply is to ask the question, as we often do, that by borrowing, we are actually imposing a tax on the future generations. If you think about it a little bit, you will understand that you cannot tax the future generations because you will not be around when they are ready to pay. So a policy, we can destroy resources. This is the sustainable development. We can harm the future generations by using up more than our fair share. We can also impose, we can enter into contracts with third parties which say that when my child is born, he will be obligated to pay you. So this is a contract which is a promise, and this, if this is binding on you, this will put you into a bind, but this is just a convention. It is not that our transactions, we cannot actually tax future generations. We cannot impose a debt burden upon them except by the social contract, not by money. The social contract means that the future generation, if at this time we decided that, okay, we are going Islamic from now on, no more interest. So we renounce the past debts. We say we'll pay the principal, which has already been paid twice or thrice. So no more payments on past loans. That's it. So it's a convention. There is no, the past generation, what they did does not affect us unless we choose to honor their obligations. So the idea that fiscal deficits are bad. So this is not true in many ways. Deficits can be good if they are undertaken to create full employment and increase aggregate demand. This is well understood by Keynesian theory, and this is part of your ISLM analysis, although it doesn't go as far as Keynes went. The idea that fiscal deficits are bad because they signal weak economic growth, fall in tax revenues, and budget gap, this is also wrong, although this is widely believed. One of the key insights is that deficits are not autonomous, that the government cannot choose a level of deficit. The government has a certain level of expenditures that must undertake, and it will spend on whatever it wants to spend, and it will always find a mean to finance it because it can always borrow what it needs from the state bank. Actually, it can finance the deficit by printing money, but for various reasons, hands of governments have been tied in this direction. But so they can borrow and they can incur a debt interest burden. The interest burden and the deficit does not act in the way that standard macro models tell you they do. So one of the insights which I will not be able to explain right now is that deficits are actually necessary. You can find a level of deficit at which you will get good results for the economy. So this is something which is called operational finance, and the theory was invented by Abba Lerner some long time ago, and many people have said that, deficit, but the idea that we must control the deficit GDP ratio should be so and so, our deficit GDP ratio is too high, our deficit is not sustainable, we need to raise taxes. All of these are just bunk. Unfortunately, our policy is driven by these ideas. Now, the deficit the deficit does some things, and too much deficit can be harmful. But the mechanism by which deficit operates is very different from how it is understood by conventional macro. So I'll let it go at this time. Maybe we'll come back to that. The idea that the government needs to save in order to finance projects. So if we raise revenue, then by taxing people, then we can use that money to pay for the Bhasha Dam. This is just wrong. The government does not, the government prints money. Suppose I raise 1 billion in taxes, I can just burn it. Taxation is just a reduction of the money supply that is in the hands of the people. So it reduces the aggregate demand. So I can burn it and I can print a new set of notes. And these two events have no connection to each other. And the government creates money by printing notes. So if the taxes just reduce aggregate demand, and if there is a constraint on the resources which are available, and I want to buy some resources, then I can tax the public to reduce their aggregate demand, and then when I go and buy these same resources, that will not lead to inflation. So there is a role of deficit, there is a role of taxation, but it's rather different from what conventional macro would have you believe. So some of our resources like cement, machinery, trees, etc., they can be saved for the future. Some resources like labor power, they cannot be saved. So it's especially urgent to make sure that we put every person in Pakistan to fruitful work, and that is one of the key takeaways from modern monetary theory, that it is possible to give productive jobs to every single person who wants to work. This is something that conventional macro does not allow us to do. So there are laws even in Pakistan that you have to balance the budget, deficit has to be within a certain, this is just misguided macro theory. The idea that fiscal deficits lead to crowding out, that if the government invests, then the private sector will reduce its investment. And if we borrow from the private sector, this will lead to a rise in the interest rate. And this will make it difficult for private sector to borrow. All of this is wrong theory. It doesn't work like that. The Ricardian equivalence theory, which is that if I run a deficit now, I will have to raise taxes in the future to finance it. This is just wrong. And many people have said this, but again, this is not the mainstream theory. So everybody is talking about fiscal space. We don't have enough revenue in order to finance the things we want to do. In particular, when it comes to the job guarantee, how can we give jobs to all the people? Because we don't have enough money to pay for it. So this is the wrong idea. Basically, fiscal space is not about the amount of money that you have in your hand, because money is freely available. Fiscal space is about the resources that are in the economy. Suppose I have zero money and there are 1 million people and there is cement and concrete and everything necessary to build 1 million houses. But there is no money. The firms will not be able to run because they don't have the money to hire workers and to. So what do? We just print enough money from nothing and we give it to whoever needs it, and the firms will start running their businesses. They will, whether we loan it to them or whether we helicopter drop it, doesn't matter. They will start, once the firms have the money, they will hire the laborers, they will buy the resources, they will build the houses, and everything will get done. So the fiscal space does not exist in terms of the money quantity. It does exist in terms of resources. Now suppose that all of our resources are fully employed, all the labor is employed, all the houses, and now the government prints more money. Then this more money cannot be used to create more output. So what will it do? It will cause inflation. So now what happens is more complicated than that. This is the Keynesian theory. But as I said, MMT goes further than this. It turns out that standard Keynesian monetary policy, which is used, doesn't work very well. And we saw this happen in Pakistan. I was on the Monetary Policy Committee. That is, what you want to do, according to Keynes, is to expand money supply freely, make it easily available, so that until everybody finds a job. But what happens is that there are many sectors in the economy. And so when you expand the money supply, the tight sectors, the more advanced sectors get a lot of it, and then they run into bottlenecks and constraints, and you start getting inflation long time before full employment is reached, because there are many sectors which are under capacity. So the thing you need to do is to direct money towards the particular sectors which are running low, and there, if money is thrown into those sectors, that will lead to capacity utilization. But if you just throw money at the economy, it will not go to the right places. But if you throw money at sectors in which there is unemployment, it will reduce the unemployment. So you have to make your credit, your money available very precisely. And actually, a study, there is a book by Richard Werner, called Princes of Yen, and he explains how Japan achieved double-digit growth rates for a long time. And basically, this is the key, he says, which is that the Bank of Japan provided targets to the banks, that you have to do so much lending in this sector, so much lending in that sector, and exact precise targets. So this is what you have to do. And the banks which achieved their targets were given credit by the bank, and those which did not were punished. And so basically, you see, if we throw money at the economy, what will happen first is the stocks will start going up in the real estate, and that's going to be harmful, because the money is going into the wrong sectors, the non-productive sectors, the gambling sectors. So you want to make sure that the money goes to the right sectors. But this is what the problem is, that the profit incentive is not aligned with the private profit incentives are not aligned with the social incentives. The most profitable investment for the nation as a whole, without any doubt, is to invest in the education of our children. But this is not privately profitable, because the investment pays off a long time later and is very risky. In fact, Barrow's study of, he studied all the factors, the determinants of growth, and he said that the single most powerful element is the public sector spending on education 10 years ago. That is the strongest determinant of growth. So if we spend money on educating our children, but this is not privately profitable for a number of reasons. So basically, that's why we need to have some public-private partnership. So the point is that the money that the government creates via monetary policy or cannot be targeted to the right sectors easily. If it is given to the private sector, they will misuse it, and they will create inflation before full employment. With targeted fiscal policy, it is possible to do things, but quite difficult because our government does not have the capacity to do it. Now, Chinese government does have the capacity. Today, China has been in the more than for a decade running at very high growth rates, and their public sector is about 75% of the economy. So, and their public sector enterprises do not have profit goals necessarily. They have some profit goals, but they also have social service goals. So, and this is what is needed because basically one of the lessons that we learned from the complete failure of capitalism over the past century is that the profit motive by itself is not enough to run an economy. You need to have social service motives. This is all, what they have understood this as to be is that you need to have corporate social responsibility. But this is just wrong and insufficient. This is just a drop in the right direction. You need a social service motive in addition to the profit motive in order to make an economy work. Economies cannot work purely by profit motive. This is the basic lesson of your invisible hand, that the private profit motive is enough to achieve all social goals. And this lesson is wrong. This lesson is fundamentally wrong. So the idea that government spending is inflationary is wrong. In fact, there is a very interesting paper by Daniel Tarullo, who was the governor of Federal Reserve Bank in New York, and the paper is titled "Monetary Policy Without a Working Theory of Inflation," and he says that we tested all of the existing contemporary macro theories of inflation, and all of them proved to be wrong. So he says there is no working theory. Actually, MMT does have a working theory of inflation, and I have outlined it in some place. It's called the conflict theory. So, okay. The idea that big government is bad and that big deficits are tied to big government, both of these are wrong ideas. Deficit sizes, a small government can run a big deficit, and basically deficit size is related to the economic goals of the government, what it wants to achieve. And the size of the government is a political choice. The major problem, the most important problem that we have in Pakistan is the colonial legacy. The government was not designed to serve the public. It was designed to extract revenue from the public, and it was designed to rule the public. And today our bureaucrats have exactly the same mindset as they used to in the Raj. So although the name is public service and it's the public service of Pakistan and they are called civil servants, but they are actually the kings. And even the petty clerk says that unless I can stop this file on my desk, how will they know that I have power? Literally quoting. So as BC Quaide, I had many occasions to provide research advice, but I found, much to my surprise and disappointment, that nobody wants any advice in the government. Why? It's very simple. You see, you have a policy option. You want to do X or Y. So they already know what to do. They are looking at the choice which will give them the maximum power. And that they know. If I tell them that choice Y is going to be most beneficial to the public, they don't know and they don't care. Because the choice which is of most interest to the public is not relevant to them. They want to make the choice which will give them the maximum amount of power, the maximum possibility for extracting revenue from the public. And so this is how government is today, and there is no way to change things unless we have a government which is actually looking out for the interest of the people. What happened in the colonial era was that the government was designed as a pump to extract money from the public and to send it to England. And there's a very nice article about how trillions of dollars in contemporary money were extracted from India and sent to England. And then you ask, why is India underdeveloped? It's a joke, but there are many books written about this joke. They make crazy hypotheses like, people here are lazy, they are stupid, the heat makes them unable to think properly and work, and they are corrupt, and they are Allah and they are Bala. And nobody ever mentions that we destroyed their industries and we took all their money and we cut off the thumbs of their weavers and we made sure that any industry that was planted by domestics was destroyed. And then we asked the question, how come India doesn't industrialize? Man, in fact, Kennedy, I think it's Rise and Fall of Great Powers, he has written that at the eve of colonization, India was producing 25% of the industrial product in the world. So it was deindustrialized by colonization. So what happened after the global financial unlike what happened after the Great Depression, where genuine actions were taken, banks were regulated, nothing happened after the global financial crisis. Even though these people, Solow, Krugman, Tarullo, they have all made deep criticism. They have said that the theory is really bad. In the end, they say that, well, it is bad, but we can fix it. There is no fundamental change required. So Krugman also says this. Tarullo also says, in this article, that yes, there is no correct theory of inflation. Our economists are using wrong theories and they are ideologically committed, he writes this, to these theories, even though they fly in the face of facts. So in the conclusion he says, nonetheless, we must continue to use the same economists, we must continue to use the same policies. So this doesn't make any sense to me, that after admitting that everything is wrong, you continue to say that we should still keep on using these theories. So just as usual. So today, all over the world, Arch-Garch models which failed completely to predict volatility in the global financial crisis are still being used and taught. Students are not taught that these models don't work. The RBC models that failed completely, DSG, they are in use in monetary policy departments all over the world, including our own state bank. There are three excuses that have been developed by Krugman and others of mainstream macro. They say, there was a large shadow banking sector, the derivative, etc., which came into existence, which we didn't know about. And so that's why we missed the global financial crisis. There was a wrong monetary policy. The low interest rates were maintained for a long time, which allowed a bubble to be created by cheap money. And there was a black swan event, an event which is completely unpredictable. And so these lead to, so there's no blame on modern macro. So they don't expect. All of these explanations can be disputed and we can prove that they are wrong, but this is the standard mainstream defense of mainstream macro that is currently in use. So what we need to do, and what I have done in my course, is to build a counter narrative, explain why these things are wrong and what the right theories are. So we need to change the way macro is being taught. We need to, if we want to survive, if we want to create a better macro today, Pakistan needs good macro theory, and today all the people who are at the helms are using the wrong theories to devise policy, and we are concentrating very hard on raising the tax GDP ratio, even though it has nothing to do with the priorities of what needs to be done. We're trying to control the deficit. Again, this is completely irrelevant. We're trying to do a lot of other things, and the real things which need to be done are not being done. So what is the most important thing? Most important thing is to make sure that everybody is working. See, you want to say that, okay, you want to maximize growth. Well, if you have idle resources lying around, then obviously you're not going to get growth. And what is idle resources? Millions of people who are unemployed, surely they can do something. Surely we can find a way to use them for productive work. Just remember that Dubai was constructed by our illiterate and ignorant labor. Can't we do the same thing in Pakistan? Of course we can, but we don't have the macro theory tools available to do this in conventional macro, but we do have these tools in MMT. So instead of macro theory, which actually blinds us to the reality, we need to rethink from scratch what is the goal, what is the economic outcome that we want, and then you devise policies which lead us to those outcomes. So there are many things, and I can't cover all of them. I covered them in the whole course. There are 30 videotape lectures, and I can't obviously summarize all of them, but I think the biggest takeaway is the job guarantee program of MMT, that which is a way to create jobs and allow everyone to contribute productively to the whole economy. And this is different from Keynes again, because Keynes said that you could just throw money, helicopter money, or you could, some people could come in and dig ditches and the others could come in and fill them, and still that would stimulate the economy, you get to fill employment. No, we don't want to have employment like that. We want to actually have productive. Every person should be doing something that is socially productive. And this is the key, that we need to find people jobs which are socially productive, which are not necessarily privately productive. And this is exactly why private sector cannot generate enough jobs, because there are lots and lots of socially productive jobs which are not privately profitable. So the government can finance those jobs. The government does not have the fiscal constraint that we are taught that it has. So we need to change the way we talk, because the way we talk, deficit, raising money, already create barriers to understanding. So we should talk about government investing in the people. We should talk about government injections of money instead of deficits. We should debunk the idea that government can run out of money. Governments can never run out of money. We should focus on the positive effects that can be created by deficit, which are already known to Keynes, and which can be much more, which can be elaborated much more. This is a complicated discussion which I have summarized in a nutshell. So there will be definitely many issues that will arise when we try to do this, but all of these issues can be handled. And so it's not that running deficit is without any problems. Is that deficit will create problems, and then you look at those problems and you solve those problems, and this can be done instead of saying, oh, no deficits by law, and we just refuse to think about what happens next. So the central identity of modern monetary theory is that the savings and profits of the private sector are created by the government deficit. This is very important to understand, very easy to understand. Just think for a moment that there is no government, no trade. There is only households and firms. Households have some money, firms have some money. Let's suppose that the firms hire the laborers, and then they produce their product, and then they sell it on the market. So at the end of the year, no money has been created because there is no agent. So at the end of the year, everybody has the same amount of money as they did before. So now there can be no profits. Because the firms have the same money as they did, so there will be zero profits. The only thing that can, if the households dissave, yani they spend more than they have, then the firms can earn profit. So basically the household savings plus the firm profits is equal to zero in this economy, unless there is money that is injected. And so the government must inject money. There is another source by which money can come in, and that happens if the foreigners inject money. That is exactly what the export-led growth strategy does. It creates foreign injections into the economy, and that allows the firms to make profits even if the government is running a balanced budget. But if the government runs a balanced budget and you have a trade deficit, then your firms and households will suffer, guaranteed, because it's just an arithmetic identity. It doesn't require advanced calculus. So, this is close to the end. What I want to say is that this creates a golden opportunity for us. It is possible today to teach macro much better than what is currently being taught by Mankiw at Harvard. And I have done this already. I have created such a course, and these are online and available. All the lectures are there, all the texts, references, all the material is there. And this is the biggest takeaway that I would like from this seminar, and I'm working on this. I've been traveling over Pakistan and propagating my ideas, and I want the macro teachers to take the lead and learn this and teach this. You will teach your students something which works instead of theories which have been proven to fail. And you will also be able to get frontline positions in the economic revolution that is coming, instead of being third-rate copies of neoclassical economists. There is a methodological point that is at the heart of the course that I have created. I call this entanglement. Macro theories cannot be understood outside their historical context. So if you want to understand Keynesian macro was developed in response to the Great Depression. So you have to understand the Great Depression if you want to understand Keynesian macroeconomics. And unfortunately, it's taught as an abstract theory without background. So students don't understand it because they try to apply it to Pakistan. They don't see anything like that in Pakistan. Then they refuse. They just think it's just some mathematics written on paper. And that is what it is, because it doesn't apply to anything real that you can see today. If you want to understand Keynesian theory, you have to teach. And I do that in my course. I give them a movie to watch about the Great Depression. I give them a historical background. I give them Galbraith's book so that they have the background to understand Keynesian macro. Even more interesting is that macro theory, history cannot be understood without macro theory. This is very strange. This is what I call entanglement. Both of them are entangled with each other. Because basically people devise policy responses in light of the theory, whether it's right or wrong. So you need to understand what the theory was that was being used to make policy, and that policy then influences history. Now Hodgson wrote a book called How Economics Forgot History, and so current methodology of macro ignores history. There is no mention of history. And so it makes it impossible for the students to understand the theory. So in my course, I set as the goal of the course that you should understand what happened in the Great Depression. You should understand the major economic events of the past century: global financial crisis, recession crisis, savings and loan crisis, Russia collapse, Brexit, Bretton Woods, Nixon shock. All of these things you have to understand. So I teach my students real economics, whereas in conventional macro you are just taught differential equations and it has nothing to do with reality.